Guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. And at the end of the video, we do talk about the viewer's pick of the week, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured. I had a lot of comics this week. There were 17 books, so let's get started. Number 17, and actually I did not get many Night Terror books this week, and that is Night Terror's Titans. It was the only one I got. I don't know how many I'm going to get of the issue 2s, but, you know, the same problem I had with any other Night Terror's book besides maybe one or two is that I don't know if there's a necessary through line or, because I hate to say purpose because every story has a purpose, but I don't know what the overarching plot is for this. You know, it feels very one and done. And honestly, even the characters is a little confusing to follow through. There was a character that looked like Donna, who I think in the long run was Raven, and then Raven shows up, and I'm like, okay, who is this girl who has black hair? In the comments below, let me know who you thought it was. But it's just your standard Night Terrors book. There's a nightmare. They go through some fights, and that's pretty much it. So giving that 2 stars, and that is number 17. Moving on to number 16, a book I was disappointed to see so low, and that's Misery issue 3. If you're looking for Venom action, you get a lot of that here. So if that's something that you liked with the previous Venom series, I think this is more of the book for you. For me, I love Liz Allen. I want to see more of her character journey, and I feel like with issue 1, we got little tidbits of that, and in this issue, that's really lost. There's some mentions of like, okay, you know, this is who you are, Liz Allen. Are you actually fit to be this symbiote? But other than that, there's not much of a story for her. It's mostly just action. So giving that 2 stars, and that is number 16. Moving on to number 15, I think you guys will be surprised to see this so low, and that is Ultimate Invasion issue 2. But maybe you're not surprised because I'm not a huge Jonathan Hickman fan, and I really don't love Brian Hitch's artwork. Again, it's just not my style, especially the coloring. It always is really dark and hard to get into, and I don't think this story was bad. You get a little bit of tidbits of the connection of the Ultimate Universe with Howard Stark, so for people like Tony Stark and Iron Man, you might really enjoy that aspect of the story, but it's very slow. It's very exposition heavy, and again, the cluttered dark artwork doesn't really help for that. Obviously, still gonna pick it up. Want to see where this franchise goes. Wants to see how the Ultimate Universe comes back, but this is not my style of storytelling usually. So giving that 2 stars, and that is number 15. All right, moving on to number 14, and this is I like the Black Label books, but I hate when they're magazine sized, and that is Superman, The Last Days of Lex Luthor. I thought this would be more emotional than it was, because it's Mark Waid, but also just talked about Brian Hitch's artwork. Also, Brian Hitch is on this book. Same kind of issues I've had, mostly with coloring. It just feels very dark. And, you know, I thought it was going to be more of an emotional issue. It's just that Lex is sick. Clark feels responsibility, and we get to see them team up. We get some flashbacks of their childhood and how they interacted with each other, and what Superman's going to do with a dying Lex Luthor. Again, I wanted to feel more oomph to this one. We've seen the Lex Luthor-Superman dynamic so many times. How do you make this different? And I like this take. I just don't know if they fully follow through with it. So giving that 2 stars, I believe. Yes, that's 2 stars, and that is number 14. Moving on to number 13, which is Avengers issue 3. I'm not a huge fan of the villains, which half of this issue kind of places where they are, be like, oh, we're destroying the world, and then the Avengers team up and try to defeat them. It's mostly an action issue, but I like the Avengers actually coming together. I think that this book has done a really wonderful job at making them feel like separate characters. Sometimes with team books, it's just like, they say something to progress the plot and not much of, this is what Captain Marvel specifically has to say because this is what her character would do. And that's something I really respect with this book, is that they really are conscious of where the characters are in the universe and what past that they had would lead them to this moment. And the art's really good for this one too. I just thought this was a little bit more action heavy than I normally would like, and not as much story. And if there was story, it was a little bit more towards the villains. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 13. Moving on to number 12, which is The Amazing Spider-Man, issue 30, which is a book I was kind of torn on because I like the artwork a lot for this one. Even like some of the plot where we get to see the return of the ideologies of Superior Spider-Man, but it was a lot of treading old water, which is definitely something I'm nervous about with the actual return of Superior Spider-Man, but I'm interested to see what Dan Slott's take in particular will be with that character since he created the character and he might have something new to say about them and maybe connect to the older series a bit more. But this kind of felt more like an homage to Superior Spider-Man than actually progressing any stories. There's a lot of, one-liners like the die is cast, and we get to see a lot of dolts thrown around, like the word dolt. So in that respect, sure, if you like Superior Spider-Man, you might enjoy that, but if you really dig deeper, there's just not much there. There's not a lot of plot, and this is pretty much a filler arc in that way. I think the only thing I really enjoyed plot-wise is Norman Osborn's arc of being a better person. I find that really interesting, and I think you could dig a little deeper into that. But overall, I do think this is a point A to point B issue to get to the marriage arc that's coming up with Spider-Man and Tombstone. They're not getting married, but there is a Tombstone arc. I believe it's Randy and Beetle are getting married. So giving that 2.5 stars, I do think the artwork was really good for this, though. So if you're looking for an action issue, that's the one. All right, moving on to number 11, which is another build-up issue, and that is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, issue 110. And, this is definitely spread a little thin because they're building into this new arc, the darkest hour, and that's the end of the issue. It's like, oh, we're getting into the darkest hour, where are these players, where do these characters have to be? Is Matt evil? Yeah, he is. And we get to see little character vignettes throughout the issue, but nothing that really progresses too much because I think you had to build into this big moment. So I just felt like this was a little underwhelming compared to previous Mighty Morphin issues that tend to be a little bit more character driven and not as spread out. And when it is spread out, I feel like the characters all have at least a moment to shine. I don't know if I really felt that here. But the art's good, and obviously looking forward to seeing what a new arc of Power Rangers will look like and a new event of Power Rangers will look like. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 11. Moving on to number 10, which is Creed The Next Round, issue 2. I like this book a lot. I think if I was a Rocky fan, I'd love this book. But I've only seen Creed 3, but because I've seen Creed 3, I could really follow the daughter's story in particular. I love the aesthetic of this book. I liked how they utilized lettering with her sign language and with her being a deaf character. I liked her relationship with her half aunt, I guess, and how that affects her relationship with her father. There's some good fighting scenes here. There's definitely some moments that feel bloated and a little expositionary, but I like the mythology they're building. I like the main character. I want to see her succeed. Some solid artwork overall, so giving that 3 stars, but like I said, if I was a bigger Rocky fan, it'd probably be higher on my list. All right, moving on to number 9, which is Rogue Sun, issue 14. I like this book. This issue is definitely more about building that mythology, telling us a little bit more about the Rogue Sons in general, where we get to see him literally like in the Rogue Sun, and we get to learn more about previous Rogue Sons, which is a lot of fun. But I still like Intermedia family. I like their dynamic where we get to see the daughter who was really supposed to be the Rogue Sun, what her role is now that she's not. Will she be the Rogue Sun in the future? I enjoyed those moments a lot. What the mother's role is going to be. We get to see the main character's grandmother, so there's a lot of interesting interpersonal family dynamics here that I loved, and then the mythology stuff was an added plus. So overall, giving that 3 stars. I don't know if this issue moved that much, but there is a lot of good little trinkets that I think will play a bigger part as the series goes on. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 9. All right, moving on to number 8. I got this one on whim. It actually is the title of the video, Hellfire Gala 2023. This is like the 3rd or 4th Hellfire Gala at this point. And for the most part, if you're reading X-Men especially, it does move the plot a lot. Usually there's like a new X-Men that joins the team. They kind of do that here because they usually have the fan votes. And in this one in particular, we're setting up to this new event, Fall of X. I'm currently not reading any X-Men titles, so that didn't affect me as much. But as a Miss Marvel fan, believe it or not, I don't even think it's been a month since she's died. She's back. They've already teased that she has her new X-Men book coming out. That's a miniseries. For some reason, we can't have an ongoing book with her. And it's revealed that she's a mutant. And if you are not on the internet and you just read comics, then you find out that she's actually coming back. But yeah, I hate that Miss Marvel is just kind of tacked on to other people's stories. Miss Marvel, what's so wonderful about her character was like, yeah, she had a connection to Captain Marvel, but for the most part, she was her own character. And yeah, she had a connection to the Avengers, but she wasn't just the Avengers. She was Miss Marvel. And it's so interesting with this death. They really been just making about everyone else besides herself. I didn't talk about this in Spider-Man, but another nitpick about Amazing Spider-Man, that the whole issue ends with Norman Osborn talking about, and yeah, couldn't help Kamala. I'm like, you saw her like once or twice. Sure, she worked with you, but there was hardly any panel time with her. And now this book in particular is the X-Men, making it really about them, that Miss Marvel is back. And it feels almost tacked on. There's not a lot of room for Miss Marvel to breathe. There's some exposition about like how she's an Inhuman, but also a mutant, and how that actually works. But it's like maybe 2 or 3 pages that we get to see that. And then also, again, you have to set up this Fall of X storyline. You had to talk about the voting of the X-Men. And I'm not saying this is a bad issue. There's definitely elements I like that there's movement. I like things happen in this book. And if you're an X-Men fan, which I am, I'm just not really a fan of the current stuff going on with the X-Men, I think it's a cool event that you get to see annually. You get to see some cool costumes, and it's something that something big's gonna happen. Someone's gonna be set up for the future. But yeah, the Miss Marvel aspect, I still don't know if I loved. So we'll see with that miniseries how it turns out and how involved she will be, or is it just gonna be driven by the X-Men? So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, which is She-Hulk issue 15. This issue is technically the finale of this series, but then they're taking a month off, and then we're just getting another series, but it's from the same exact creative team. I understand when you reboot stories, when it's a different creative team, or you feel like there's a big moment, there's like, oh, readers need to read this next issue. But the way this book ends, I'm like, the next issue feels like it's just gonna be a next issue. I don't think it really needed to be an issue 1, because she's fighting the villain. He wants to explode the world. She saves the day. Jack of Hearts also saves the day, but it also has like a bomb within his system, so he has to deal with that. And everyone kind of finds out she's with Jack of Hearts. That's the end of the issue. It's nothing too huge. And then they're like, oh, well, go check out issue 1 of Sensational She-Hulk. I'm like, I don't know if we desperately needed that, but I like the issue. I think it moved a little bit further than previous issues. There's some good character moments between Thing and Jen, and having the whole Fight Club situation. Overall, I think it's solid artwork, and we'll see where the series goes. Giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Firepower issue 25. Finally, this book's back. It's been a long time since last issue came out. There's something I remember about Firepower is that it's very quick to read. There's not a ton of dialogue, and the whole beginning, it's really slow, where it's just like, okay, this is the events that happened, how is everyone dealing with it, and there's not a ton of emotional ramifications until the end, where we actually get to see what is so great about Firepower, the blending of this real world with this mystical world, and now the mystical dragon is attacking Chicago, and the team and their family has to deal with that, and they all have to be stronger within their firepower. And then we actually see that Sensei character, he also has firepower, so there's some interesting movement. It just kind of all happens at the end of the issue, probably like the last 10 pages. It is double sized. It was only actually an extra $1, so that's not too bad. But overall, I liked it. I think it's a solid book. The artwork is so good for this book. It really, really works. And I think Robert Kirkman and Chris Samney are just a wonderful team. And I'm glad to see this book back. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars. And that is number 5. Moving on, that is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Silk issue 3, a book that honestly I think is such a pleasant surprise, underrated book. You should be reading it. It's just a really good continuation of previous Silk stories. You're somewhat run-of-the-mill story where Silk going into a dream, trying to fight a monster, but there's some really good emotional weight throughout the book that honestly I think some of the lower books on this list were missing when there's a lot of action. This is, again, they describe expositionary wise, they describe who this monster is, but in a fun way because of the emotional connection of her brother wanting to save Silk, and then the brother goes into the dream. We have a nice cliffhanger with the villain becoming the monster in real life. There's just a lot of good movement there. It's a good arc where you could finish this monster story in 5 issues, all while you are telling a bigger story with Silk and her brother wanting to kind of be a bigger hero, even though he doesn't have powers. So overall, giving that 4 stars, that is number 5. And moving on to number 4, a book that I've been pleasantly surprised by, and that's Klik, Klik, Boom, issue 2. I remember I got issue 1 on whim. And issue 2, once again, proves why this is such a wonderful book. It's really unique because one of the main characters only speaks through pictures. So you're kind of finding out her history through this nervous, babbling journalist that she teams up with, that they're complete polar opposites, and their dynamic is a lot of fun throughout the issue. And the journalist is so happy to be like, okay, I'm gonna help you. There's this lawyer I know, this judge I know, and then she ends up being killed in the end. You're like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? And the twists and turns are really great for this one. Again, the odd couple of it all really works, and then visually this book really works because one character isn't speaking at all, so it really relies on the visuals a lot, which the artwork is splendid for this one. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 4. All right, moving on to number 3, another book that I've been so pleasantly surprised by, and that is Incredible Hulk issue 2. I loved Immortal Hulk, and I never knew if a book could live up to that or be similar to that. And Incredible Hulk does a really good job at feeling like a similar tone to Immortal Hulk, but without feeling like a copy, without feeling like, oh, we're just doing an homage to Immortal Hulk. We've seen this before. It's very haunting, though, in almost like lake house horror, I would say, because you're in this small town and Hulk is Bruce is really just trying to live his life and trying to stay away from Hulk. And then you have this sidekick type character who kind of has her own demons and just wants to see the Hulk, just wants to be his sidekick. And then you get this cult that runs into them, and Hulk has to be Hulk, and he rages out. But the artwork is so wonderful. You kind of get this dreamlike sequence that feels very different from the more dark, edgy side of the regular visuals of the book. And I just really like the dynamic of this new character and Bruce. It's nice that he has a companion throughout the book. It's a really, really solid start, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. So if you like Immortal Hulk, I do feel like this is different enough, but has a very similar vibe to that book. So overall, giving that 4 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, also speaking of dark Marvel books, Hellcat issue 5. This is the last issue of the miniseries that I really recommend you guys pick up, especially if you're a Hellcat fan. But even if you're not, I think it gives enough of a history lesson on the character. And the whole story is this internal battle of her saying, am I a good person or am I a bad person? I married this guy who made me bad, but did he make me bad? Was I always bad? And it's really her fight, and this, you thought this larger detective story was like, okay, who was the murderer? And it really never mattered who the murderer was. It always was a story about herself, and all that internal demonization of herself literally externally coming out into a battle in this issue. And I just thought it was really beautifully written. It's a love letter to Hellcat of every generation, and you could tell that the creative team just loves this character. And I miss miniseries like this with female-led characters that maybe not get an ongoing book to still have a really, really tight character story, because a lot of times I feel like some of these books usually just tell an action story where you leave the character and it's not going to really affect the character later. But this, I really feel like it did something to progress the character while still looking at her past and telling a concise story just in 5 issues. And the artwork is really well done for this too. It's haunting, really fits for the vibe for this. So overall, giving that 4.5, and that is number 2. Moving on, another dark book from Marvel, and that is What If Dark Spider-Gwen issue 1. I think if you guys know me, you knew this was going to be number 1. I was really pleasantly surprised with this book. Obviously, I knew I was going to like it, but I felt like I was going to like it for a different reason. I thought she was going to get powers. I thought it was going to be very similar to what Spider-Gwen was, but the reason I love this book is that it really relies on the story of Gwen from the 616, and it tells a very, very different Spider-Man story. And it reminds me why I love old school Spider-Man. And again, maybe it's because I read Amazing Spider-Man this week, and I was like, this is just all action, and there's not a lot of character progression. This did a really wonderful job at showcasing action while still really telling a full-on character story, like the old days of the death of Gwen Stacy. And I think it really helped that obviously you have a modern writer, but like Jodie Houser, and And then Jerry Conway, who wrote Death of Gwen Stacy, to write this as well. So I think the collaboration was really well done. And then also the artwork, especially the coloring, felt very old school. It felt very pastel, and it really worked for this as well. And then actually the opening, they showed like the first 4 or 5 pages of how you led to this. So they actually show a reprint of all those years ago, the death of Gwen Stacy. So with this issue, we get to see Peter dies. Like, obviously at the bridge, he dies, and Gwen learns that Peter was Spider-Man, and she's feeling this PTSD. She obviously is dealing with the realization that her boyfriend was Spider-Man, and then the realization that he saved her and died. So she wants to be Spider-Man and without powers, because I really thought this was going to be a book about, like, she gets superpowers and she becomes Spider-Gwen, but she actually just wants to get revenge and try to kill the Green Goblin, utilizes some of the equipment from Captain Stacy's stash, and she really just wants to get that revenge. And she tells Harry, he gets involved, and she doesn't end up killing the Green Goblin, because she's like, hey, Peter wouldn't want this. And then we get to see Harry does cross that line and doesn't know it's his father. And we get to see Harry go into his evil Green Goblin mode, and Gwen still wanting to be Spider-Man or Spider-Woman, and even without powers, still be this hero, which I thought was so fascinating, because we've seen a lot of different versions of Spider-Man, a ton. And it's always, this character gets powers. What would they do? And it's very similar to what Peter would end up doing, but maybe they have some background of their character that makes them a little different, like Miles or Gwen, but they all, they're all cemented by this idea of responsibility, and cemented by this idea that they have the same powers, and that's why they need to be responsible. But with Gwen, she has this idea of responsibility, but because she knew Peter, and without superpowers at all, which I just thought was so fascinating. Overall, this is a 5-star book for me. I just thought it was a beautiful story. I'm very excited to see where the rest of these what if issues go, and it almost makes me want to see more. That's what's so wonderful about these what if books in general, is that sometimes you do get to see more. I don't know if we'll see more of this one, just because we do have Spider-Gwen, but I would love to see another Spider-Man event. Maybe this character shows up somewhere, and we get to see more of her story, because I just think she's very unique to any other version of Spider heroes. So those are the books of the week. That's my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what was your pick of the week, and the viewers' pick of the week from last week was Big Game, issue 1, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.